Hello, my name is Joseph Yamazaki from Florida State University. In this presentation, we would like to talk about L2 task engagement. Specifically, we discuss what tasks are, what task engagement is, the brief history of L2 task engagement research, a theoretical framework that we propose to understand L2 task engagement, and several research methods that are in line with the proposed theoretical framework. To start, task-based approaches to L2 instruction have become de rigueur in many learning contexts. However, probably all of us have seen that the same task or sequence of tasks can provoke varying responses when presented to students within the same group or classroom. Why is this the case? In this presentation, we believe that it is because of task engagement. In other words, momentary task engagement can vary across students who are doing the same task, even if that task is highly stimulating. What do we mean by task engagement? In this presentation, we define this concept as a momentary emergent phenomenon forming out of adaptive interaction between interconnected dimensions of engagement that are situated in context. Please note that first, there may be important differences in how individual engagement manifests among students who have the same overarching level of engagement. Second, confusion in understanding task engagement may arise when macro-level information is used to capture micro-level insights about the time, task, and agent of task engagement. We will come back to these notes later on in this presentation. Before discussing task engagement, we would like to talk a little bit about tasks. First, it is important to distinguish between task as process and task as work plan. Task as process refers to the actual achievements made by the language learners when they perform a task. In other words, it refers to the goal-directed educational activities focused on understanding or exchanging meaning. While task as work plan refers to a range of work plans which have the overall purposes of facilitating language learning. Second, tasks can be characterized in various ways. For example, a task could be input-based or output-based. A task could be one-way or two-way. A task could be focused or unfocused, and there could be a pedagogic task or a real-world task. Now moving to task engagement, we would first like to explain why we believe that task engagement is important for L2 learning. This is because we believe that task-based interaction both drives learning and is the site where learning can best be observed. Also, task engagement is broadly linked to research on school engagement and L2 classroom engagement. Both of these see active student involvement, including task-based interaction, as central to student learning. Earliest works on task engagement in the field of L2 learning research viewed task engagement as something related primarily to the quantity of learners' on-task behavior and something that should be measured through actual language output. However, this perspective does not integrate broader understandings about engagement as multidimensional in nature with different facets operating interdependently. An important concept related to task engagement is engaging with language, EWL, proposed by Svalberg. EWL is a mode of engagement that specifically frames the intentional L2 learning mechanisms that lead to language awareness, including deliberate and selective attention, and depth of processing, within the rubric of engagement. EWL is unique in that it integrates multiple dimensions in which learners engage, with the targets of the learning activity and the likely outcome. Recent research on L2 task engagement emphasizes the interdependent nature of the cognitive, social, and affective dimensions of task engagement. Some findings are noted here. First, it was found that elements of the learning environment, mode of interaction, and the interlocutors can have differential impacts on L2 learners' task engagement and learning. Second, it was found that differences in the amount and type of learners' engagement coincide with different on-task behaviors. In this slide, we would like to clarify the difference between L2 task engagement and L2 task motivation, since the distinction between these two concepts might be ambiguous. We view that task motivation refers to factors that influence how students learn and perform on language learning tasks. In other words, we view that task motivation is a precursor of task engagement, or the byproduct of engaging in a task. In other words, an outcome that engagement contributes to. So, we believe that task motivation provides a view of learners' initial choice of action, how long and hard they pursue it, and the reasons underlying the choice, while we view that task engagement provides a framework for studying the quantity and quality of the action that ensues from task motivation. In this slide, we present several theoretical frameworks for task motivation. Each of these theories could account for what action does a language learner choose to do, why that language learner chose to do that action, and how long and how hard that action will be sustained. We believe that the sheer number of these theoretical frameworks might be one of the reasons why the distinction between task motivation and task engagement is blurred. In this slide, we present a heuristics to distinguish between task motivation and task engagement. As can be seen, we believe that some indicators are more strongly associated with task motivation. These include attributions, interest, and willingness to interact. On the other hand, we also believe that some indicators are more strongly associated with task engagement. These include focused and selective attention, emotional regulation, and time on task. In addition, we also believe that some indicators are associated with both of the concepts. These include goal-orientedness, positive dispositional orientation to task, and nonverbal social communication cues. We now turn to the theoretical framework that we propose in this presentation to better understand task engagement. First, we believe that there are three very important keywords to understand task engagement. The first is task. What we mean here is that characteristics of task design and task implementation have a central influence on generating and sustaining learners' engagement. The second keyword is agent. Engagement is done by a learner agent, and the differences in the amount and type of task engagement are necessarily tied to the agent doing the engaging. The third keyword is time. Task engagement only emerges in the temporal context of the L2 interaction that occurs in task performance. In this slide, we introduce a concept from which our proposed theoretical framework was directly inspired. This concept, named Momentary engagement, was proposed by Symonds et al. 2021, and it refers to a microlevel lens for studying how individual agents participate in discrete tasks, activities, across the second-by-second and minute-by-minute pace of momentary time. So, following these scholars, we claim that L2 task engagement should be 1. Defined as a multidimensional complex of interrelated task-focused cognitive, behavioral, emotional, and social elements. 2. L2 task engagement should be operationalized at the individual level of granularity. 3. L2 task engagement should be focused on the discrete task, in other words, task as work plan. And 4. L2 task engagement should be studied using methods that examine the quantity and quality of that activity as it unfolds across a second-by-second and minute-by-minute pace of momentary time. Based on the definitions of task engagement presented in the previous slide, we believe that it is important to orient the granularity of task engagement to the microlevel of task, agent, and time. We believe that task engagement research focusing on particular tasks and the L2 learning mechanisms involved in those tasks can increase the specificity of research and contribute to a more robust evidentiary base for task-based pedagogy. However, unless the individual agents forms a central part of the unit of study in task engagement, what results is a somewhat artificial separation of issues with engagement and learning behavior clearly in focus, and the learner as an afterthought to those abstract processes. So, we claim here that task engagement requires a targeted, micro-level time frame that can tap into the momentary lived experience of learning activity. In order to make this new framing for task engagement usable, what is needed is a theoretical apparatus for describing the parts, structure, and process that are part of task engagement. For this purpose, we propose a systems framework based on complex dynamic systems theory, CDST. In the next couple of slides, we describe task engagement from the perspective of CDST. One central principle of CDST is that parts do not exist in isolation. From this perspective, task engagement is more than merely the aggregate of its discrete components, including behavioral, cognitive, emotional, and social engagement. Rather, task engagement is the integration of these elements into a whole, forming a coordinative structure. Also, as we have insisted in previous slides, task engagement is enacted by and embodied through the learner, the agent. It is then necessary to include within any system's boundaries, including task engagement, an agent capable of exercising intentional action that contributes causally to the system's outcomes and processes of change. From the perspective of CDST, task engagement can be seen as a process. This means that at the micro-level time window of minutes and seconds, task engagement is dynamic. It evolves adaptively over time and is self-maintaining. It is also possible to explain the mechanisms of task engagement in the moment or after the fact, and to anticipate future interactions based on general trends. This means that explanations and predictions depends on multiple factors that interact interdependently, with some parts having a larger influence at certain times, but not at others. Task engagement is context-dependent. In other words, it is always situated and intrinsically tied to context. This means that contextual factors should be seen as actual dimensions that help determine the shape task engagement takes as a momentary and emergent construct. So, by articulating specifically what contextual factors are being taken into account for task engagement, information about the role of these contextual factors will come to be incorporated more clearly and more concretely in evidentiary accounts and explanations in the field. Lastly, we introduce 4 research methods to investigate task engagement from the perspective of CDST. The first 3 methods can be called time-intensive methods, which focus on trajectories of change and development, self-organized processes, and emergent outcomes. The first method, the ideodynamic method, can provide a mixed methods template to collect accurate, real-time data on the learner's intra-individual variability during task performance. The second method, state space grids, can also provide a visual map of how variables interact to influence the dominant patterns a system self-organizes into and for how long they stabilize. The third time-intensive method is the experience sampling method. This is designed to collect in situ and time-dense data that taps into the ways individuals experience, feel about, and report on learning activities in the moment. There are also relation-intensive methods that describe systems' parts and their interactions, providing a focus on the complex underlying structure of interdependent relations. An example is social network analysis. This method reveals which component parts are related to each other, the nature of their relationships in a particular system or network, and what patterns or network features emerge from these relations. To conclude, we believe that task engagement is a useful construct for examining how and why individuals focus on, interact within, and learn from tasks in the L2 classroom. We also claim that reconfiguring the level of granularity at which task engagement is conceptualized, observed, and measured will allow scholars to address how task engagement emerges as a function of tasks, time, and agents. For this purpose, we propose a complex systems framework, and we hold a perspective that the multiple dimensions of task engagement interact in context and lead to a momentary emergent phenomenon forming as an adaptation to the task demands and situational requirements. Thank you.